Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Mugdha Lele, and on behalf of the TechX team at Venture Center, I'm happy to host the third wave of our Only One Theme Awareness Talk series on innovation management. Today is the 14th talk in this wave of Only One Theme, and today's topic discusses impact assessment practices and reporting for startups. Our distinguished speaker for today is Dr. Prasad Modak. Let me briefly introduce Dr. Modak before we begin the talk. Dr. Modak holds a BTech in Civil Engineering and an MTech in Environmental Science and Engineering from the Indian Institute of Technology, Mumbai, along with a doctorate in Environmental Engineering from the Asian Institute of Technology, Bangkok. With a career that spans several decades, he began as a professor at the Center for Environmental Science and Engineering at IIT Bombay for almost a decade and later continued his academic journey as an adjunct professor at the Center for Technology Alternatives in rural areas, Sitara, for another 8 years. Currently, Dr. Modak serves as the Executive President of Environmental Management Center LLP and the Director of eConnect Knowledge Foundation, a not-for-profit dedicated to fostering environmental awareness, training, and sustainable entrepreneurship. Throughout his illustrious career, he has collaborated with premier international institutions such as the World Bank, IFC, Asian Development Bank, UNEP, UNIDO, and UNDP, as well as advised several governments, including those of Bangladesh, Egypt, Indonesia, Mauritius, Thailand, and Vietnam. An acclaimed author, Dr. Modak has published numerous books and research publications that have significantly influenced environmental management practices worldwide. His works, including his seminal books on environmental impact assessment, environmental management towards sustainability, and practicing circular economy, have not only been recognized by the UN, but also Oxford University Press and CRC Press, and have also been translated into multiple languages to reach a global audience. Dr. Modak, with this brief introduction, I'm very happy to welcome you, and now I hand over the session to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mugdha, for this introduction. And I must thank you, Dr. Premnath, for remembering me and inviting me for this very exciting session, to me at least. So, friends, I'm going to run through slides, um, but just feel free. I know that Dr. Mugdha is going to manage the chat. So, if you have any suggestions, questions, just put them in the chat. And I'll request you, Dr. Mugdha, that if you find that I must stop and respond to a particular question raised, feel free to stop me and I will do that and we can move ahead. So, uh, today's topics to me is exciting, and many of you here are already in the startup uh, ventures. Some of you may be interested to get into setting up your own startups, and you will find that the aspect of impact uh, assessment and reporting becomes very crucial, especially when you're approaching today's investors, because many of them today are really looking for creating an impact which they can then say they were responsible partly, in financing that startup, which led to some very, very important positive impacts. So let me get to my slide deck first, and Mugdha, let me know whether it's visible to all of you, so that we share and make it full screen. Does it work, Mugdha?
It is still loading at our end.
Okay.
Yeah, now we can see it full screen. Yes.
Now it's okay. Great. All right. Let me just be a little more giving you information on what kind of work I do. Basically, I have two companies which run. One is called the Environmental Management Center. So we are a 30-year-old, 3 decades company, and we work in India as well as overseas. And the other is a foundation which is called EcoNect. That's a Section 8 company. And one of its mission actually is to support green entrepreneurship, building capacities. And there is something called the SEED program of the United Nations, mainly for eco entrepreneurship, and we are the India node. All right. Let's first understand what is it which we want to do when we say impact assessment. So, impact assessment is essentially, remember, is just a change. By default, we often think that it has to be negative, but that's not the case. So, the impact can be positive to the environment, the economy, and the society. So, there is a basically idea is that how do we understand the change? And that change, its significance becomes important, and that is dependent on the magnitude of that impact, the duration, the short or a long term. Is the impact mitigable, or is it a reversible or irreversible nature of the impact? And that tells us that which impacts are really very significant if they are adverse, which they have to be understood and managed. So when we manage the adverse impacts, the first step we always do is to be compliant to the applicable laws and regulations. In our case, in India, we have a plethora of regulations and also standards which had to be complied to. But we go even more than the compliance by enhancing the positive impact. And that step is often done ensuring conformity with global sustainability standards or by following global good practices. So, this is the important step that when we look at the impacts, if they're adverse, we mitigate them. We also remain compliant. And whenever we see there is a positive change that we're bringing in, we take efforts to be aligned with what we talk about as a global sustainability standards or following global good practices. Now, when we talk about managing the adverse impact, there is a preferred sequence where we would like to first avoid the impact itself in the first place, then minimize it to the extent we can, then mitigate the impact through certain measures. If it's unavoidable, then we figure out how do we compensate those affected, how do we restore if the impacts are leading to very adversaries. And in fact, in some cases, we look into possibilities of conservation. And the last two really refer to more of impacts on the ecological systems, which are to be also looked at. And then we have to also report on the impact. And we have to report to all the stakeholders, which we have to address. And it includes generally the entire value chain, the communities around us, and importantly, also the investors. Now, there are two terms which we have to distinguish here. One is the impact, and second is the risk. And I also want to talk here about the terms opportunity and innovation. Now, in some cases, you find that the startups report the adverse impacts due to their business and, of course, address them so that the operations are in compliance. And in addition, you have to meet the investor requirements that may require you to go beyond compliance. That's one category. Because here the impacts, if not timely identified and mitigated, they can become risks to the business. And that's important that we have to understand that if the impacts are not well managed, they can result into risk. The other kind of startups are those startups who actually understand some of the major problems which are faced globally, nationally, locally. They challenge sustainability. And then these startups look at their solutions as an opportunity to do their business. So here they use the power of innovation in materials, technology, and not to forget the business models to be a green entrepreneur leading the market. So we have two ways to look at the businesses of startups. There is an impact risk linkage and there is an opportunity innovation linkage. Let's take an example. I don't know how many of you know this company in China called Shine. So this is a Chinese fast fashion startup which was established way back in 2008, and then today it's one of the global giants in the textile domain, garments particularly. And this company has a story of a massive environmental impact. And that was, of course, due to short fashion cycles, very high carbon footprint because the supply chains were heavily reliant on fossil fuels, a lot of transportation, and also water pollution due to the use of synthetic dyes, and also microplastic release when they process the polyester. But then also there were major social impacts. What was found that they were exploiting labor. There was a lack of transparency, a lot of plagiarism, small business harm because they were repeatedly caught copying designs from independent artists and fashion brands. And there was also a issue of toxicity in the kind of clothing that they provided because these products which they were developing, they use harmful chemicals, for example lead, which has a significant health risk to consumers, and they came up with essentially low quality and therefore not that long lasting. We use this term disposable fashion. That's what they were doing because many of the shines items were cheaply made and they never lasted that long, promoting also at the same time a culture of overconsumption and waste generation. So once this is a kind of a impact which was happening from their business, what did the company do? Of course, they should have ideally fixed those problems upfront, but they started as they getting criticized across the world. They tried efforts to reduce the waste, the carbon footprint. They started recycling, made use of more sustainable materials. They also came up with a clothing take back program in 2023, where the customers could, in fact, return and get rewarded for the used shine clothes. But the major issues, as I said, were also on the social front. So they came up with a responsible sourcing program. And then they also invested significantly in the factory upgrades. So improving again the labor conditions and work environment, came up with a supplier code of conduct. So supply chains also were looked into, came up with third party audits, and these audit reports were to be disclosed for transparency. And then they ran campaigns. Their famous Shine X program, which in fact created a collaborative platform for the independent artists to showcase their work. And that was in response to the plagiarism accusations. And they also got influencers, media outreach, and they also invited people for their factory tours to showcase good working conditions. So you can see that the impact which was created because of the neglect that the Shine did not understand what damage they were doing to the environment, and there were social issues at the same time. They had to they had to really go into the root cause and try to start coming up with those actions, activities where the impacts were expected to get mitigated. And they tried to increase, of course, their sensitivity to the workers. And they also made a lot of effort to wash, in some way, you can say, washing their sins and correcting the course, also doing a better media outreach. But the question came that did this work and what was the effectiveness of these measures? And Shine did face a significant criticism because many critics found that all what was done or claimed to be done was essentially greenwashing. There was a challenge in terms of impact reporting, how accurate and transparent it was, and sustainability not being well communicated, disclosures not done fairly, only claims being made in some cases. It didn't really help much for this company to address the criticism from many of the in fact from the environmental NGOs. And slowly they realized that there's a competition coming in. For example, another company, same segment, Temu, they started challenging Shine's dominance because arguing their case better on sustainability. And consumers, they also realized that started slowly shifting towards sustainable fashion alternatives, but still not that strong enough. And so frustrating it is to see that the profitability of the company still remain intact, although there was a damage in terms of their reputation because the impacts were not well managed. But certainly the signal was clear that they would at some point of time will face a major financial downturn, and that is because of both the consumer and the investor pressure on the impact management and impact reporting. Let's take exactly a different case. Now, this time from India, and some of you might have heard this company called EcoWare. So, EcoWare is a company which is using agricultural residues to make cutleries. For example, what you see here on the screen, and variety of such products which are biodegradable and at the same time utilize the agricultural waste. And this company has a very different story. So the company came up first with plant-based packaging, and as I said, all other cutlery items as a replacement to single-use plastic. So this was something everybody was happy to know about, and they were using locally available, in fact, the raw material which was an agricultural waste. So the products were natural, biodegradable. They could estimate that they would get biodegraded in a span of 100 days. And it became then a good option to plastic. And to prove that they were actually having their claims, uh, you know, uh, objectively assessed, they got certifications, not just from Europe or India, but also from USDA bio-based certification, which is quite prestigious from the United States. And this was all due to the entrepreneur who understood the uh, the opportunity of eco entrepreneurship. So remember, I talked about two kinds of startups: startups which are careful to mitigate, uh, and startups which actually jump upon the opportunity on the canvas of sustainability. And that's what happened here in this case. And Ria Mazumdar, she conceived this business, got a good traction into even not just the hotel chains, but also procurer like the Indian Railways. And there was a significant impact of that good work, obviously reducing not only the waste, but also eliminating the use of single use plastic. So the EcoWare's impact, if you were to look at in the 2023 impact report, they don't have yet 2024 report out, but look at the way they started reporting. They talked about how much is the reduction in the carbon intensity, despite significant growth in the business. That is important. They also, through the way designed packaging, they reduce the transportation emissions, and they also talked about doing work beyond the business. For example, in schools, lunch programs targeting composting and food waste reduction. So there was both environmental and social measures. And if you look at environmental impact, they could quantify the reduction in single-use plastic, cumulatively reducing 1 billion pieces of single-use plastic. That's huge. They got a climate positive certification. That's a very interesting way on reporting the impact. And that was a significant reduction in the carbon intensity. And then the employment opportunities which they created, the health benefits people got, because obviously human exposure to harmful substances associated with plastic manufacturing and use was another big benefit. And then, as you know, now more and more interest is coming in circularity of the material flows. And you see there rewards on circular economy approaches and waste reduction, as I said, using the agricultural waste. So this is a completely different example from Shine, what we see, and therefore it gives us a idea that there is a need that we need to understand the impacts upfront, and we also want to know what is the framework on which we can report the impacts. Typically, a framework for impact identification, assessment, management, and reporting consists of these 6 blocks. So, of course, we define the objectives. We normally would use theory of change to understand what kind of outcomes we want to see. We do a baseline analysis, that is the pre-intervention state. What is it happening right now? For example, a lot of use of single-use plastic happening already as example. And then we develop the environmental impact and risk management plan. In the case that our business is to be made compliant, or we conduct opportunity assessment using sustainability metrics. The opportunities which we see in aligning aggressively, I would say, to sustainable development goals. Then we select indicators aligning metrics with compliance, sustainability goals, um, follow stakeholder engagement process, and meet investor requirements. Then, the moment you have the indicators, we collect the data. We use tools, some indices. We are going to talk about some of the interesting indices which have come about. And then we follow reporting to the stakeholders and look at some of the standard reporting formats which are accepted now globally for communicating to our stakeholders. Examples of indicators, typically we group them into social, environmental, and economic. And you would see that in this slide, we talk, many of them are, I'm sure you're familiar, and you may even see many of them actually came up when we looked at the 2 case studies earlier of Shine and EcoWare. But once these indicators are identified, we report on them and collect the data accordingly. You would ask me that, all this work of reporting, impact management, why do we do? Are investors interested to know? Of course, investors want to know the business risks and impacts, including supply chain. If the environmental and social impacts are neglected, the investors also want to know the adequacy and the completeness of the ESG roadmap and action plan, and whether it is properly accounted in terms of financial resources, how conformance is going to be achieved to international frameworks. Uh, most of the most of the investors want to see conformance with the International Finance Corporation or IFC's performance standards. And then how aligned is the impact reporting to disclosures like the Global Reporting Initiative? But there are several now. We are not going to go into those details, but there are several options available for reporting of the impacts. And at least many investors want to say, even if whether it's applicable or not, are you going to do or doing already impact reporting following SEBI's BRSR, which is Business Responsibility Sustainability Reporting? So answer is definitely yes. All investors today in startups want to ask these questions, and your pitch decks must include how are you handling impact identification in your business cycle, in the entire value chain. How are you identifying the significance, which are the hotspots? How are you proposing to manage them? And how are you going to collect the data to keep reporting the progress? For doing all this, you would realize that you really need to do of your business in life cycle thinking. And here you got to look at the complete cycle of using raw materials all the way to end of life of the products, and even figuring out how do I get back those products and explore recycling to reduce my drawal of the raw materials. And in the whole process, you can see that I can report on my carbon footprint, water footprint, ecosystems quality in terms of how I'm ensuring that I'm not affecting rare or endangered species, um, whether I'm doing any excessive natural resource extraction, am I impairing human health or protecting health, and so on and so forth. So all these indicators are to be really formulated by bringing a life cycle thinking. And it's very important that, in the case of, a business which is improving an existing product design, then you will see a cycle going there, where we explore alternatives, bring out the life cycle canvas, assess the alternatives, and then come up with the best alternative, which will make use of these indicators. So it's not just the best alternative is the cheapest or equivalent quality alternative, but it's as much possible benign to the impacts produced on the environment as well as on the social side. Once we are in that framework of life cycle thinking, right, from sourcing, manufacturing, distribution, use phase, end of life, lots of ideas start coming that how can I keep minimizing the impacts at every stage. For example, if I'm doing a product, how can I design the product for recyclability, disassembly, repairability? Now, how can I increase use of renewable or recycled or biodegradable raw materials? Can I think of lightweight packaging as example in distribution? How do I engage with the consumers or your customers? Can I introduce take backs? Can I bring in IKEA experience, as we say, which brings more ownership to your customer? And then when we are in the end of life, how do I handle extended producer responsibility? How can I be more inclusive to create green jobs? How do I handle my reverse logistics and so on and so forth? So, the moment you bring in this life cycle thinking in front of you to understand the impacts and impact propagation, you come up with interventions. And that's the way the business starts becoming more and more resilient to the risks which otherwise are arising because of the neglecting of the environmental social impacts. Now, if you want to drill down further and use jargon, then maybe we want to report on global warming potential, ozone depletion potential, and also acidification, eutrophication, freshwater toxicity. So if I'm making a detergent, a new type of detergent which has got a lot of phosphorus, is there a risk I'm posing to the water bodies because of the eutrophication? Again, look at resources, energy, water, whether my land use is changing because the way I'm operating my business maybe is linked to agri, and therefore there's a land use change, toxicity, going all the way up to human health. So there are a number of parameters that we may like now to investigate to understand the impact. And one question I often ask when I talk to my startup friends, and I caution them that are we overdoing? There is a moderation required. We call this as a step of scoping. And I use the word, if you remember earlier, significant impacts. And significance is to be understood, and then you focus and not report anything and everything as what you see typically spewed out by the life cycle assessment softwares, which many of us use. Let's take another story. Have you heard about a company called Green Soul? And I don't know how many of you have used the Green Soul shoes, which gives a second life to the used shoes and makes the shoes which are of the same quality and affordable. Now, they use life cycle assessment. In fact, we did for them this life cycle assessment, and we compared the brand new shoes versus the refurbished shoes. And you'll see these indicators I talked about earlier: GHG emissions, eutrophication potential, right? Mineral resource use, fossil fuel consumption. And you see that what happens because of the pair of new shoes and the green sole shoes, which are refurbished shoes. And there you will see that it's scoring heavily in terms of huge reduction in the impact because of the refurbishing strategy of the innovation. That means they are in a position to show that, well, our product is much environmentally and socially sound compared to buying pair of shoes which are manufactured from the fresh materials. Now, remember, while numbers are great and you can have a very nice report, in fact, we did that for this company. It is very important that startups understand not just the numbers of impact, but it's critical to understand how do you manage those impacts. So we use the word LCM, life cycle impact. That is perhaps more important than just LCA, because LCA only guides. So we have to use the results of the LCA. Since we were talking about shoes, I don't know you heard about this company, Allbirds Shoes. In fact, today I buy only Allbirds shoes. And why? Because they have very low carbon footprint. They make use of sustainable materials, and they bank on regenerative agriculture and carbon offsets. So this is also a way that the company is talking to its customers, the way they communicate. When you go in a shop and decide to buy Allbird, they really capture you if you are sensitive to environment and sustainability, provide you all these details, when you buy, and you have a QR code to go and learn more about the sustainability metrics of Allbird. I use the word in my talk so far in between circularity, and not just carbon emission reduction today we are looking at is another powerful indicator is what we call material circularity index. And this is coming up strongly. So I would really urge that you look at the computation of MCI for your businesses. Remember that 45% of global carbon emissions today are achieved, the reduction, through improving on material circularity. So material circularity becomes a very important indicator, and we construct this indicator by looking at the material flow from production to the end of life, how the materials are moving. And sometimes the materials at the end of their life enter into another segment of the sector. For example, you may find that the plastics which are abundant or wasted, when processed, get into the textile value chain. So you have something called rpet, which is now become a fashion, in fact. So circularity indicators are often cutting across sectors, and they are good to get established for communication. So there are many companies now, and in fact, the top circular brands today, they follow reporting on the material circularity. A lot of interesting tools have come up. One of them is a Circulatex tool from Ellen MacArthur Foundation. There is also reporting happening on circularity index from a company, Republic Services, and you have also Kidney Circular Fashion Index for textiles. And you see all these companies, some of them names are familiar to you. They all are now reporting their sustainability performance using material circularity index. So when it comes to communication, therefore, we have to understand firstly why we are communicating and how we are communicating, when do we start communicating, and what is it which we have to communicate. So this is very important for us because these types of communication will not only help you to establish yourself as a true uh, sustainability linked organization, but in fact, in the process of reporting, you discover and make more and more innovations. So when you talk to all our stakeholders, customers, investors, and these boxes tell you a bit about what should you talk about, how you should tell, what kind of tools that you could use to communicate. I think all these become very important. We often say that while impact reporting is mostly a science driven exercise, the actual communication is passion, empathy. It's a really an art. How do you communicate what good things you are doing? And that's what appeals to the investor. So you may use graphics, you may make videos, you may publish case studies. So we call some of them like a visual storytelling. We also look at in communication, writing stories of change. Look at some of the major indices how the impact storytelling could be done, which is very convincing. How important it is let me give you an example of an Indian startup. This is a Mumbai-based, but operates in Bangalore and in Morvi. They do something very interesting that they extract the black carbon from the emissions and then blend it while making their flooring tiles. And they're beautiful tiles. You'll see in this picture, whatever are the tiles there are, all carbon tiles. And they report their impact into something like 25 kilograms of equivalent CO2 per square meter of the tile used. And they also express it in terms of it's equivalent to cleaning 30,000 or 30 cubic meters of air. But what is missed in this calculation is the transport related emissions of the tiles. And the boundary of LCA often misses that important aspect. And therefore, you find that the impact story is not great as you start, bringing in the distance traveled to transport the tiles and the emissions resulting from the tiles. So you got to therefore be aware when you start reporting your impacts, and you have to choose your communication strategy with a strong call of action. For example, if you were to say we hope to drive a more sustainable future together, but instead you said that we are raising $5 million to scale our sustainable products and services with a projected 3x ROI within 5 years, everything at the end saying that while driving financial and socio-economic environmental benefits aligned to the sustainable development goals. So everywhere the communication has to be strong when we talk about the impact reporting, the punchline, and it has to end with a confidence. And sustainability leadership has to be shown and indicating that the business is going to be future ready, especially when an investor starts talking to you. I'm ending my slides now with one very interesting topic, which maybe, Mugda will take another 4 or 5 minutes if it is okay. Um, so this is about disruptive and responsible innovation concepts. And this is a very interesting topic today because many of the innovations which we want to do uh, are fundamentally disruptive, but at the same time, we want them to be responsible. What's the experience there? So basic tenets, if you see, of disruptive innovation, many times it starts, at the lower end to graduate to the upmarket, having shown first its commercial viability, reasonably good quality, and reasonably low cost to compete and hog that segment, and then you and start moving upwards to come up with good enough products, and then those products which have a great impact reporting on sustainability indicators capturing the top end. So from bottom up has been one of the very common approaches. And the innovations actually are not exclusive. Sustainable innovations and disruptive innovations are not really mutually exclusive. But then remember that for sustainability to gain a mainstream foothold, you need disruption. So disruptive thinking, in fact, is a genesis. And when you move in that ladder from the bottom to top to start taking the market, then you have to have a good sustainability story and a progression, how you're improving your product or service for more or say better impacts. So to get inspired, I just picked up few case studies. This is a very interesting company called Farmers Edge. This company is today handling about 440 million acres, huge landmass, Canada and the US, Australia, Brazil, Eastern Europe. And what they harp on there, and this is a very interesting statement by the CEO. CEO is saying that our view is not to use technology to completely disrupt what people have been doing for a generation, but we are using technology so that we can do business better, more efficiently, more profitably, and ensuring that you have a significant social benefit. So this is a very interesting drone-based platform, giving advisory, giving also the whole element of traceability to build confidence. It's an interesting company which seemingly looks disruptive, but favorable disruption. That's why I picked up this example. Another very interesting business is a company called Dialogue, which actually took clues from the COVID periods and now is realizing the importance that how do you manage the mental health of the employees and how do you balance work life. And therefore, the company which started with this kind of an idea, just giving you example of social impact indicator, they're handling today 150,000 employees and their family members and doing great on the top line. Revenue is going up by 300%. Right in way back in 2018, now they already expanded to Germany. So it's an interesting company again to look at anything new or disruptive. But I think the technology or material case is the hybrid, which is a big innovation on the fossil free iron and steel production. So what you see here is a green steel, and it is moved into such a big scale because they use green hydrogen to make the steel. And there is a huge demand, obviously, because of the new barriers coming in on the limits on the carbon emissions. Solar glass, as you see, more and more is a company name, more and more use of renewable energy expected. Can we have a dual function where you have light penetration at the same time? You generate solar energy. So this is again an example of a very disruptive but very sustainable innovation. This is a toilet made from 3D printing of plastic waste. Very interesting innovation again. You're solving one problem, but also solving another problem of sanitation in this process. It's called the thorn. Pavilion is another interesting case where you have a completely new design approach. You see on the left showrooms being created to for exhibitions, exhibiting products, and after it is done, you have the furniture which you actually donate to the community where you're holding the exhibition. So it's a Chinese company, and you can see the approach is very interesting to look into design, different disruption, but very beneficiary to the community. So to end, I would say that assessing impact and not to forget risk of disruptive innovations in startups is extremely difficult. It's a very essential process. You have to go through impact identification, significance, mitigation, and management and reporting. Uh, and it is not a surprise that we'll always be struggling. How do we how do we really estimate, calculate, report the impact? Although we do see emergence of several tools which have come up, there is a huge uncertainty. What people finally realize that it's not the numbers, but what they're looking for a very heart-touching story, a true story, uh, a a passion which the business owner has and is communicating. I think that's what is finally the crux of impact reporting. So I'll stop here, Mugda, and I hope I'm just in time. And if people have any questions, I'll be happy to take. Um,
Yep.
thank you.
Yeah, just on time, in time. There are questions, but I thought we can first just, if you don't mind, I'll request you to comment a little bit on uh, the real elephant in the room problem, which is um, do to what extent is are these sustainability related metrics and so on and so forth today influencing purchase decisions? I mean, are there some broad numbers? You showed some brands which are sensitive to it, right? But on the other hand, there are a lot of startups who say that, yeah, this is all great as long as you can meet the price, which is the current alternative that's available and which is not necessarily clean, right? So, what is the overall experience right now? Is the case strengthening as we go along? Are there certain sectors which are seeing more action in this space where impact, in whatever way, social, environmental, and so on and so forth, uh, is really determining a purchase decision or a price
Yeah,
point in the field?
right. So, Prem, answer is first yes. 10 years ago, story was different. And today, no investor. We work a lot with investors, all kinds of funds, and I haven't really come across any investor who says, "Chalo, I will look at impact." Um, just like a checkbox, but it is becoming a part of the decision from the investor side and also now increasing on the customer side.
Mhm.
And we will see that happening. Some of the sectors where I see a huge traction is textile, electronics, agriculture, and food. I would call them as sectors where there is already a fair amount of interest and a pressure.
Mhm.
For example, one of the funds which we supported is called Omnivore. Many of you might have
Mhm.
heard,
Yeah.
which is agtech, and Omni has its own ESG framework. And
Mhm.
we work with their investee companies, and there is a regular uh, reporting happening from these investee companies. If there is any slippage, then there are questions raised. Physical audits also being done. I was right now, just before coming here, with another fund called Multiples. Multiples also has their own ESG policy. You have also, Prem, companies, I mean, funds like Avishkar, which were
Mhm.
basically impact funds. They have a very
Mhm.
strong ESG framework, and it has now gone also significantly in the commercial banks. So we work with a lot of commercial banks and
Mhm.
NBFCs. So even the lending for debt, you would see now more and more, questions getting asked. The loan application formats also now start asking questions. So I would say 10 years ago, situation was a bit different and not now anymore. And I will urge, I mean, of course, the teams at the venture center, but all some of them in the audience today and are into startup industry. Please give equal priority to the price, quality, and sustainability, all three. And let sustainability not be a supplement.
Mhm.
Uh, it has to be mainstreamed, and more you do. I mean, there's certain areas like growing, like climate finance, climate tech in startups is really growing. You need a proper impact identification and reporting framework.
Mhm.
So answer very briefly, Prem. High time
Yeah.
is there.
Mhm.
You can't do without it now. You have to that the part
Yeah.
of your business
We are
plan.
also seeing investors asking for ESG audits and so on and so forth. So while we are at the investors, can I just ask if so do I do notice that on one side there are investors so who might have earmarked some dedicated funds for say with a given sustainability theme or an impact theme, right? And those who are
Right.
of course so it's something like a gate for them to uh, the startups have to basically fit in. It's about fit into that particular fund scheme. So
Hmm.
it's like a gate. But
Hmm.
how do these investors look at returns and timelines compared to say other venture capital investors? Like,
Yeah.
do
So
they give any relaxation there? Is there any difference in views, or is it just a gate to say, yeah, if you do this, we consider you, but our expectations are very similar to any other VC fund.
yeah. So it depends on the fund policy in terms of how they engage with the investor. Those who are looking at early exits, uh, their attitude is very different on sustainability because sustainability, after all, is a long-term thinking. But But now we also have evidences that when you bring in sustainability in the business logic, I'm saying,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
there is a additional value creation. If you just look at any startup which is trying to, in their business, curb the greenhouse gas emissions, actually is there improving the resource use efficiency in many cases, which pays back. So there are some patient investors, their attitude is different, and then some who can actually blend finance. Then they're a little bit soft on it. They realize the importance of sustainability to be considered, and then take steps accordingly. To give you an example, in the next 3 years, those startups which are relying on export market,
Mhm,
will have to educate themselves on the new impositions coming, especially from EU.
mhm,
And that is not happening today. But in the projected balance sheets of the startup,
mhm,
say 5 years and beyond, if these factors are not considered, it can even crash the business. So investors are now bringing in sustainability not only to be good, to say that we are really committed to sustainability, but
mhm,
purely as a business risk proposition. So that's a different thinking now already there. And most of the funds in this country I'm associated and banks,
mhm, mhm,
and I'm finding that they're very clear about it. So
mhm,
I would say time has come that the cost of going beyond compliance is much less than being I'm getting worried about that it may make you not so competitive. And
mhm,
the bright innovations, the way they are happening around now. I mean, EcoWare was one example I gave you, but there are many such companies who are leveraging on the challenges that we are facing and coming up with solutions. So that's something I would say like a blue sky, as a matter of
mhm,
fact, is
mhm,
the hope. And I think innovation, and that's why I put this couple of slides that all of our startups must innovate keeping sustainability in mind.
mhm,
So make disruptive innovations responsible innovations.
mhm.
That's the way ahead.
Okay. There is a question
Before
from
we move on
Hiran.
to the next
Yeah,
question,
yeah. There's a
alert,
question.
please.
Yeah, there's a question from Hiran Vedam, which is
Uh,
about sharing about defining metrics around climate adaptation. Can you share your thoughts on defining metrics around climate adaptation and this transition?
uh, Transition for what?
I think
Energy?
it's talking about energy transition, probably.
Ah, okay.
Hiran, if you want to comment, you can. Just.
Yeah. So adaptation indicators for a project level or a startup level are very hard to define because the adaptation is not so much as a local issue taken when we make adaptation plans,
Mhm,
but they are more area wide, in terms of the spatial scale. So preparedness to adaptation, if we want to demonstrate,
mhm,
then when you are, say, let's say, releasing products which are designed for certain type of thermal stress,
mhm,
which is going to be critical maybe if the product is in use for 10 years and the temperature extremums are changing, then bringing in the resiliency in your innovation of the type of material or design you would do
mhm,
is that you are actually adapting to the climate change through your
mhm,
product innovation.
mhm,
So this is a important consideration. But you asked me what is the indicator for that?
mhm,
It becomes more of a checkbox indicator that have you factored in your product certain type of climatic stressors, yes or no kind of thing, and then asking a couple of lines, how did you do it? How are
mhm,
you doing? I'll give an example which is little different, Prem, on the infrastructure side. One of
mhm,
the ports that we were doing climate risk and adaptation study for a port,
mhm, mhm,
what they realized that the gust wind speeds were going to increase in that coastline by 50% in the next 15 years. So
mhm,
what they did was the crane that they would procure, whatever was the tip gust wind speed defined for normal procurement, they raised it up to take 50% of the extra
mhm,
heightened gust wind speed and adapted to that challenge through procurement process. So each business identifies where adaptation is needed. For example, if I'm doing a business of a district cooling center, then I better do a thermal profile of the next 15 years, especially if I'm running a PPP model
yeah,
in my district cooling center. No
mhm,
indicator as such, but a tick
mhm,
will come that did you look into it? And then if yes, what did you exactly do for adaptation? Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
there's no
So I
number
think,
there.
yeah, I'll request Hiran to speak and ask a remaining question. Hiran, go ahead.
Thank you, Premnath. So, Dr. Modak, I was looking at like innovations leading to, let's say, climate adaptation outcomes, like being able to manage your thermal stress better, or people are able to meet their food requirements better, or something like that. How do we quantify it? And similarly, like let's say your innovation prevents job losses or ensures that the transition to the more sustainable economy is done in a just manner. What are some of the metrics? I mean, each one has a very different metric, but are there some like overarching metrics that we can use that investors across the board would be comfortable with to say,
Yeah, so
you know,
Hiren, the answer is mixed. For some of the early questions you asked me, they are related to what we use the word coping. And there is no number there, but the recognition that you perceived a certain climate risk or you are actually helping through your solutions, increasing coping ability of people. There's no number here, but the tolerance will be taken that you are able to handle a broad range of uh, you know, uh, temperature range because of your service or product design, increasing therefore the ability to be able to cope. When it comes to job losses, you definitely can use numbers that what is the estimated number of people. Let's say if there's a mining closure because departure from the consumption of fossil fuels, then those people and their families will be impacted, obviously, if there's a closure. And then you may say that you are creating either green jobs or green entrepreneurship or skilling these people so that they can continue to be at the same level of the livelihood elsewhere. And you can put those numbers. So many people, especially using their corporate social responsibility funds, are working on improving the climate resilience of the neighborhood where they are working. They talk about numbers in terms of potential job losses and the job creation. So there you have some comfort in terms of giving numbers. But the other one earlier will be more of coping statements. And then you will say what measures or what value add will happen because of your product and the service.
all right,
Yeah, I
thank
think
you.
before I go to the other questions, I think Mugdha wanted to announce that the feedback form is now on the chat box. Is that right, Mugdha? That's
Yeah,
what you.
please give your feedback. The link is there in the chat.
Yeah, okay. A couple of other questions I'll just take up quickly. There is one about LCA. So I thought it's a little bit about the mechanics of LCA. So maybe you can give a few comments on that. How do people get it done? What are the how do you get the historical sources of data? Do we get it from review papers? How do the numbers translate in valuation? How costly is an LCA analysis? Should there be preliminary research by startups, which they should be doing? And what is a sustainability scorecard? Yeah, from
So,
Shamal Bose.
so Shamal, normally people conduct LCAs using some tools, but there are also very many possibilities of just using your own Excel model and using publicly available databases like EcoInvent. Uh, but if you go for the commercial software tools, that is examples like SEMA Pro, Gabby, OneClick, some of them have also started customizing to our geographies, our regions, by doing their own research and plugging in more relevant numbers. The LCA softwares, if you want to buy yourself, is expensive. The numbers will be above 5 lakhs to 10 lakhs. If you get an LCA done, you may be able to get a quick LCA done between 1 or to 2 lakhs. The LCA output is to be it's not just the output, but interpretation of the output is important. Iterative use of LCA is what most startups do. So they come up with an idea, put their data in the software about the materials, the sources, the process, estimated waste and emissions, end of life related information, and then keep trying alternatives so that you get a better design, functionality not compromised, but sustainability ensured. This style is more prevalent today in packaging industry, and there are also LCA softwares specifically developed by the Sustainable Packaging Coalition. Uh, and these software products are as expensive as I told you, something like 4 lakhs, 5 lakhs for both. They can do packaging as well as product, but really good when it comes to packaging alternatives. So the scorecard, actually you can develop once you have these indicators. So there are, when I mentioned to you, the MCI, the Material Circularity Index, is a form of a scorecard. I think when I will share with you, Prem, the PPT, I will
Mhm.
add a slide of references for people to dig into more on some of these concepts.
Mhm.
So I think that should explain to you use of LCA.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think Walmart, by the way, I hope I can take a few more minutes of this, right? Professor Modak?
Yeah,
Can
yeah,
I
I'm
take?
okay.
Yeah. Okay. So this Walmart had a sustainability sort of scorecard for their packaging
Yeah.
materials, right? They were basically labeling products on the shelf with a scorecard. And well, that brings me to other issue, which is somebody has brought up, which is, do you expect that the global importance of all these reporting and all of that will remain high, especially in the context of current political movements and so on and so forth, which are sort of tending to tilt in one direction. So Muhammad Sajid Abdul Hamid has asked this question. Yeah. So
Yeah.
is it going to stay, or do you think it's going to move as the political winds shift, and
No,
especially
I don't think so. I think don't
yeah,
worry about the political preferences shown by somebody in some part of the world, but the reality is that we just cannot miss it. You mentioned Walmart's case. So the scorecards are computed based on the LCA, MCI outputs.
mhm,
Now, there are many companies, even here in India, they look at the portfolio of their products and packaging and set a sustainability scorecard. Actually, they set it up. And each year they want to score better and better. That means if they are having 100 products, if they find 50 are above 60 in 100, they make a target that how do I take my products to the next level of crossing 70, 80 out of 100 and so on and so forth. So I would say don't look at the geopolitical context at the moment. Remember that sustainability, I think that's very important, I'm saying, is a business case. Sustainability is not an expression of ethos.
mhm,
Sustainability is entirely material and a business case.
yeah.
Movement as a startup, you grasp it, then I don't think we'll have such questions whether Mr. T is doing something in some part of the world, doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah, I think some of the things you brought up, for example, business risk, that's very obvious, right? I mean, that's very clear that that relates directly to investors and to customers and so on and so forth. Or for the matter that, well, the question of whether they're willing to pay more, maybe, and that's also, we're seeing some trends in that direction. Investors asking for ESG reports is also something which you are seeing now as well. So there are a couple of other questions. One is more about how to do the impact quantification for a given startup. So Dolly Basin has asked a question about one case, which is about where there's an open innovation case where say they're working on multiple startups contributing to a larger problem, right? Is there such an exercise where people have sort of found, sort of found out what are the kind of impact each participant has done. And the second one she's mentioned is about SaaS products to measure and reduce carbon emissions and mitigation. And what is how do people measure the impact of such products?
Mhm. So, the classical process of impact assessment is we look at the activity. By when I say activity, that will include the material flow, raw materials all the way to processing inputs you give in terms of water, energy, materials or chemicals, right? The entire material flow diagram. Now, for every item in that material flow, there is an impact. Some impacts are direct, which are in terms of emission release. In some cases, the impacts are because of embodied carbon in the material that you're using, right? So it's a science of how do you really identify them based on but the starting point is the material flow. If you give me a material flow of your business, and I imagine the life cycle of the product and the service, then we identify, like one of my slides was showing that across the life cycle, how do you identify the impacts and therefore the mitigation or minimization measures. So it's a quite a process which is classical, but you can follow it. And then that may help you to identify and then handle the impacts. Yeah. So it's a quite a good process, known now how to do it. And there's a fair amount of good guidance available how to conduct. And I can maybe Dolly, right?
Yeah.
You can reach me or I'll give you, Mugda some of the links, which I'm sure you can take from them and
Yeah,
take a
we'll
look.
we'll forward it. We'll arrange it to
Yeah,
send to
no
her
problem.
as
I'll give
well.
some
Yeah.
information. Yeah.
Sure. Let me just take the last question before we close. So there is a question from Amay, which has got to do with, you know, basically if he's setting up a new business, right? Um, how can he, um, how can SDGs and all guide it to, to assess what one should or how one should steer and operate their business. But let me widen it a little bit. What is your advice for people who are starting new businesses and who are looking at these kind of problems where social impact, environmental impact is a key aspect of it? um, what uh, what should be their strategy to take it ahead? Is there how can it guide the choice of problems? Is there any thinking behind it? Are there some pressing indicators or something, the headwinds which are directing people in certain directions? Is there more or less seriousness around certain parameters? Do you want to comment on that for people who are starting new businesses? And also, the process of raising money becomes so important for many of our entrepreneurs. So, they getting into a zone where they're not able to convince investors, uh, of sort of business value juxtaposition against impact is something which also bothers many of them. So, do you
Mm.
want to comment on that?
Sure, sure. So for the new business, suppose you want to look at it from the point of view of, again, as I said, sustainability being a driver, then you start with the challenges. And the challenges, I mean, just as an example, because we have been talking a lot about plastic as a
Mhm.
challenge. Plastic is not a challenge, but managing plastic waste is a
Yeah.
challenge.
Mhm.
Uh, if that is a problem which a startup genuinely feels is not sufficiently addressed, and the solutions either are technologically not so superior, or the commercials are not working out, or the microplastic problem, as we call, managing
Mhm.
plastic to create another problem. If these are still not attended, so the problem driver is to be first understood, for which one looks at the kinds of reporting on challenges happens globally. So, for example, there's a global risk report which is published every year. There is a global environmental risk report which is also published every year.
Mhm.
And they give you risk statements and they tell you what is the problem scale, what is the solution status today. I think a startup I would recommend who wants to go in that route of doing a business to solve some of these problems should read,
Mhm.
and then identify. And then, of course, we find out what's in the market, who are those solution providers, and which we always do in the stakeholder engagement to find out why the customer is not happy or user is not happy, the pain point, and
Mhm.
the value add that you will give, again, in the context of sustainability. I think that's how the conversation will start. The
Mhm.
17 sustainable development goals, which we often refer to, the business owner should create what we call as a sustainability or SDG radar from the business. So out of the 17 goals, you have to make a radar that these are the 4 goals that I'm actually doing my business aligned to. Now, under each goal, we have targets and indicators. So you
Mhm.
follow and borrow those indicators and see what data flow you can do in your business to support that indicator, which is globally understood under that particular goal. Right. So suppose you're doing something great to minimize greenhouse gas emissions, then you are on SDG, Sustainable Development Goal 13 on climate action. Under that, it has got already indicators, and you have to see whether can you report on those indicators for which what kind of data flow I need to generate. So that's how the logical process,
Yeah.
it starts. So I will suggest that the usual steps of problem analysis, opportunity assessments, identification of barriers, and where the innovation point has to be.
Mhm.
Now, if that gets communicated to the investor and the scale at which that impact is getting addressed, will attract the investors. Of course, the economics of that business has to be sound.
Yeah.
But you normally reach that stage when you do a integration of sustainability thinking in the business canvas itself. And
Mhm.
that's how it is going to work. Right?
Okay. Great. Okay, great. So I think with that,
Okay.
we will close this. There are a few questions, but I think we should close now.
Yeah.
We'll have another chance to, welcome you to Venture Center and run a session for us, hopefully in person
Sure, sure.
as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank
So
you so
really
much.
appreciate it. I request people who have not filled up the feedback form to do it as well. Thank you so much, Professor
My
Modak.
pleasure.
Now back to Mugda.
Thank you, Dr. Modak, for your valuable time and this wonderfully insightful session. And as Dr. Premnath said, we would be very happy to host you in person very
Sure.
soon. So I
Hopefully,
also want to request everyone to give your feedback before you close this session. And let me also take this chance to announce the next session in this talk series, which is happening on Tuesday, 8th of April, 2025. This is going to be our 50th talk in this only one theme talk series. And the topic is very interesting, which focuses on setting up a technology transfer office. Speaker will be, of course, Dr. Premnath himself. So please do join us for the next session, which is coming on 8th of April. Thank you very much.
yeah. And
Thank
Bigda,
you.
I see a lot of people asking questions. You can even share with them my email ID and
Sure.
they can
Okay.
me. Yeah. I just looked at the chat box. So
Yeah.
no problem. Yeah.
Yes, we will do
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr.
Thank
Modak.
you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Bye.